solve critical business problems and drive scalable growth. Today, we have a fascinating guest who's tackling one of the most frustrating pain points in the coaching industry: tech stack complexity. Joining us is Peter, the founder of CoachStack, an all-in-one platform designed to simplify the tech stack for new coaches. Peter's building a solution that consolidates everything a coach needs: client agreements, scheduling, payments, resources, and more into one seamless platform. What makes his story particularly interesting is that he came to this problem as a client of an executive coach, experiencing the clunkiness firsthand before deciding to build the solution himself. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Amazing, Peter. Let's start with the origin story because I think it's one of the most relatable founder journeys I've ever heard. You're a client of an executive coach going through a transformation, but the actual client experience was very clunky. DocuSign links, separate calendar links, Google Drives, Square invoices, all disconnected. Walk us through that.
Yeah, the lens for me was, I've spent my entire career essentially working at kind of early stage B2B SaaS startups. So that's kind of how my brain is wired. It's interesting, like looking back on it, like I'd heard of coaching before this coach reached out to me, but I didn't really know what it was. And at the time I was at a climate tech startup. I just gotten promoted to lead the customer success team. And I got this cold message on LinkedIn from a coach who was like, "Hey, like, congrats on your recent promotion. Have you thought about kind of what's ahead?" And the messaging really landed with me. It's like, sure, I'll hop on a free discovery call. And just right away, I could tell that she had great energy and that she could really help unlock me. So that's kind of how I got into coaching. And then again, like the actual experience of working with a coach was amazing. It was transformative. And just throughout that process, there was just these little light bulb moments of like, like, why is everything a separate tool? Like, this doesn't seem like it's that hard of a problem to solve. And it kind of started there. And then, it was like many months of like research, both like market research and also customer development before I actually took the leap to actually go all in on it. But the genesis was me working with a coach, having this kind of hodgepodge experience. And again, the actual result for me was transformative and the coaching was amazing. But I'm like, hey, if I'm paying a few $1,000s for this high quality coaching, there should be the client experience commensurate with that as well.
Absolutely. That's such a powerful insight, Peter. Experiencing the problem as a customer before becoming the founder who solves it. You mentioned that your background is the early stage B2B startups and product management of coaching. How did that perspective help you see the problem differently than someone else who's been in the coaching industry for years?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, I think when you're just getting started as a coach and you're like, it's kind of one thing at a time, right? Where it's like, oh, first thing is I need a website. So I'll go to Squarespace, right? Then I need a scheduling link and okay, that's Calendly. I need payments, it's Stripe or a service like that. And at in those moments, it feels fine. And I think the coaches that I spoke with that have been doing it for 3 to 5 years plus, like the operational complexity as you kind of scale is pretty crazy. And I think that's kind of gets lost is that because each step you did in isolation and it felt okay in that moment, like you didn't really feel that pain or you didn't have that problem until you were kind of many years into it. So that was part of it. And then I think just the other piece too was as I got into the customer interviews, the biggest pain point by far, which is I'm sure very common across all businesses, but it was around growth, right? Like, how do I attract clients consistently? How do I convert them to paying clients? How do I retain them? How do I upsell them on other services? So part of Coach Stack, it started with the, simplifying operations part, because that's the foundation in terms of like the scheduling and the billing and all that. But I think the really big piece are the growth tools. So right now I'm like kind of focused on, building custom websites for coaches, lead magnets, helping them launch their own, newsletter or podcast type of thing. Because like, sure, he's like having the operational simplicity is key, but you need clients on the front end to come in and I'm trying to meet coaches where they're at, whether they're just getting started or they have an existing practice and they just want to simplify the operational flow.
I just want to ask, after that initial light bulb moment, you didn't just jump into building. You did 30 to 40 customer interviews with coaches. That's a lot of validation work upfront. What were the common trends that kept popping up in those conversations? And were there any surprises, things coaches were struggling that you didn't?
Yeah, I think, the main thing was everyone got into coaching because they love coaching people, right? They love like working with clients. They love obviously the impact that they have and they can see it in terms of like someone getting a promotion or going out and starting a company or whatever that is. And everything else is kind of ancillary, right? It's like the whole like the business side of it and like the marketing side, like they know they have to do it, but it wasn't like why they got into coaching. Another thing was, a lot of them went through coaching certification programs. There's many of them in the US, there's many of them abroad, and a lot of them cost a few $1,000s. And it's pretty in depth and it walks you through like how to work through a session with the client and like measure their progress over and run that piece of it. But every coach I talked to like said these programs did not teach them about the business or the marketing side of it. So it's kind of like, like going back to school, right? Where it's like, okay, you're taking a class, everything's great, you feel energized, and it's like you graduate and it's like, oh shoot, now I need to get a website and figure out how to attract clients. And obviously everyone starts with their own personal network and, and it may be okay for the first few months. And then they have to figure out, okay, how do I start to broaden my reach and get new clients? And that's when some of those pain points hit. So I think those were two things that came up. Again, it was kind of like every coach used their own kind of hodgepodge of tools. And honestly, it was some coaches were using 5 tools, 8 tools, 10 tools, even more, which is pretty crazy. And again, I think they were all not sure what the right channel was. It's like, do I post on LinkedIn? Do I post on Instagram? Do I have a newsletter? Do I have a podcast? And I think they were kind of all unsure of what direction to take. And that's kind of how not only the idea for Coach Stack came about, but also this coaching flywheel framework and methodology that I also developed because I knew that the software was part of it, but what coaches really needed was an actual system to execute. So the idea here is that this coaching flywheel framework is like the engine that powers Coach Stack.
It's really, really interesting. Like
Yeah.
intrigued by
Now
it.
I can talk more about that. If you want me to to do
I'd
that?
love to learn more about the flywheel. The flywheel is amazing.
Okay, yeah. So the flywheel, it's funny. The first time I heard the term flywheel, um, it was actually at that first startup that I was at after college. I was 22. It's like, so this is 2013. And the CEO like got up at like an all hands and kept talking about the flywheel. Like, what is this guy talking about? And now fast forward to today, I know it's being used a lot and it's a really powerful analogies. The idea is that like, it takes a lot of effort to get that flywheel turning initially, but once it is, it's really powerful. So in terms of how that relates to coaching, I've broken it down into 6 steps. So step 1 is kind of clarify your focus. So get really clear what your coaching practice should be all about. So it starts with like understanding what your information advantage is. So it's like looking at your own experiences, your education, your relationships, and understanding how you can uniquely provide value based on your life experience. And then crafting that into a coaching offer, which leads to like who your ideal client is, what your branding looks like, all that stuff. And then step 2 is attract ideal clients. So it's like, how do you have the website and the social platform and whether it's a podcast or newsletter or whatever, how do you have all that be coherent and like attract that ideal client that you want to work with? The step 3 is like to build trust and nurture. Because the reality is that even if someone comes across your website or your LinkedIn profile and really likes your approach and what you're doing, they're not going to take action until they have a problem. So for example, like if you're a career coach, right? Like I might love your content. I might sign up for your newsletter just to learn more about your approach, but I'm not going to reach out and ask for a coaching session until I'm like laid off or I'm having issues with my boss and I needed to navigate them. So the idea is that like once you attract that ideal client, you need to keep nurturing them over time. And that way, like when a problem does arise, they don't need to do like a ChatGPT search or Google search. They just know like, oh, I'm going to work with Peter or whoever, right? Because I like Peter's stuff. So that's step 3. Step 4 is to obviously enroll them into your kind of flagship coaching program, whatever that looks like. Step 5 is, which I think is the most important part, is to deliver transformative results because that's what coaching is at the end of the day. And step 6 is to leverage that and amplify your growth in terms of like referrals, testimonials, social proof. And that way, like the idea is that like if you keep doing that, you're gonna amplify it because obviously we all know any like website or any offering that has a ton of social proof and testimonials, like immediately there's a lot there. So I think that's the goal. And obviously when you're getting started, you have to get those first few clients, drive amazing results, get amazing testimonials, and that makes getting future clients in the future that much easier.
And if I'm not wrong, you mentioned that you ran a pilot earlier this year with a few coaches, and the feedback was like, you're on the right track, just need to add a couple more things. Now you're in the middle of adding those features and getting ready to officially launch early next year. What's the process been as a solo founder with one developer? How are you managing product development, customer feedback, and preparing for launch all at once?
Yeah, so good question. Yeah, I ran the pilot. It was around this time last year. And at that point, it was truly like a minimum viable product. And I knew I needed to add a couple more things. I just didn't know what those were and what was most important. And through that pilot, got really clear feedback from coaches around what was missing. And at this point, it's still fairly easy because all I'm doing is replacing existing tools that they're already using. And a lot of coaches have the same needs. So, for example, coming out of the pilot, to get it just ready to go, I was like, oh, let's just do a Calendly integration. That was the quickest to get the scheduling piece. And that was working. And but the coach was like, hey, like I love what you're doing here, but I don't want to pay Calendly $12 a month. Like, can't you just include that? So that was one thing. And then I think for me personally, I use a tool called Granola to take notes, and just the just having the AI note taker is so key. And obviously, coaches just told me over and over again, like, hey, like notes is really important for coaches because it's primarily just video sessions, and having that and having like action items and tracking progress over time is super important. So I knew I wanted to add a kind of AI note taker. To really do that the way I wanted to, I need to have the data, like the transcription, to be able to do that. So, I end up adding like Coach Stack video. So there's like a video conferencing piece there, primarily because again I can pull that transcript and you have that data for the AI notes. So those are kind of the main things that came up. And then I think in terms of like other wireframes that I've developed over time, and just showing them to coaches and getting feedback. Whenever I showed, again, back to the growth tools, like the lightweight CRM, like that sort of stuff, that's when kind of coaches started to light up like, oh, because I think it's one thing to be like, hey, like this platform can save you time or save you money, which is obviously important. But I think when you can start to correlate your product to like revenue, that's when people can really see the ROI. So I think when I started to show them those sort of tools, they lit up, and that's why I was like, okay, I got to make sure that this is part of it too. Right now we're kind of building this lightweight CRM, meaning like, on the website, if you download a lead magnet or book a discovery call, like that person kind of goes into this CRM automatically. You can track your, opportunities. And then when you're closing someone out, it'll automatically send them like a contract if necessary, send them a Stripe invoice, just kind of automate that entire flow. And then beyond that, it's things like forms. Like, so every coach has like an onboarding questionnaire form that they'll send a client. And again, they're using Tally or Google Forms or whatever. And just trying to take that. Essentially, my approach has been like, let me try and find the best product in each category and really try and simplify it down to a way that kind of meets the coach where they're at with their workflow, and obviously have a very consistent UI UX so that like, as you're navigating these different tabs in Coach Stack, everything just feels familiar.
And speaking of being a solo founder, you mentioned in our previous call that every time you hit a brick wall, for example, designer had help. You took a Figma course and then design and kept moving forward. That is the classic bootstrap founder mentality. And I really respect you for it. But at what point you stop running through brick walls yourself and start delegating? How are you thinking about scaling yourself?
Yeah, no, that's that's a very good question. Obviously, like, with all these AI tools, it is making it easier. But there definitely will be, bottlenecks. I mean, in terms of kind of how I'm thinking about the go to market strategy for Coach Stack, because I'm still kind of actively developing the product and everything's not fully flushed out. I thought it made the most sense for me to start with this kind of premium done for you offering where I'd only onboard a couple of clients per month, kind of really work with them and build them a beautiful like custom website that reflects their brand and everything and I do the full kind of white glove platform setup for them. Uh, and I think my plan is to do that for the first couple of months, while I kind of finalize the full product and make it really easy for someone to self-serve and get onboarded. Candidly, I think the other reason is because even though I have hypotheses around what the website template should look like, or what the lead magnet should look like, or what the form should look like, I think it's going to be serving a lot better if I just work with a handful of coaches, build the actual custom flows for them, and then have the data to be like, okay, which type of website is performing the best, or what type of lead magnet is performing the best. Then once I know actual proof of like what's working, then I can build templates off that. I feel like if I would have just work with Cloud Code right now and just try and build templates, it wouldn't be as effective as me actually working one on one with each coach and having that, again, that social proof of like, hey, like here's an example of a coach who had this type of lead magnet and here's how they're posting about it on LinkedIn or wherever. And here's the result it's driving. I think that's a lot more powerful for a customer to hear. I think ultimately the goal is to have this be primarily a SaaS platform where I'd obviously need to hire a couple of folks to do operations type of things. And potentially, if this done for you offering is really popular and people like it, then obviously I could hire someone like myself who could kind of do a handful of kind of deep one-on-one engagements each month as well. And I mean, to your point, like that's why, I'm probably maxed out at like maybe like 3 clients per month because like I really want to make sure that for those first few experiences that it's world class because obviously I want to make sure that they have an awesome experience that they can give me a testimonial, which will again fuel that next phase of growth for Coach Stack as well.
Absolutely. And I'd like to talk a bit more about your clients and your target customers, not just targeting existing coaches, or specifically going after experts, like C-level or VP level executives at companies like Amazon, Salesforce, who want to start doing executive coaching on the side. That's a really specific and interesting. Why that audience? How does Coach Stack help them go from I have expertise to I have successful coaching?
Yeah, good question. So I think going back to like the coaching flywheel, I think that's a key part of this. And it's really about like positioning first. I think, a lot of people are asking me like, well, what do you think of like AI and how this, disrupts the SaaS businesses, right, in general? And my thought there is that, AI and for example, with some of these websites I've been building recently using Claude Code a lot, I'm using tools like Paper.design, and they're really awesome. And I think they help with that kind of last mile process. But I think still the bulk of the work is like doing that, like looking in the mirror and getting really clear on, what your core expertise is and how you can add value to potential clients and then building that core coaching offer that resonates with your ideal client in terms of like pricing and duration and whether that's like one-on-one versus small group. I think when you're just getting started, I mean, if I look back to the experience that I had with my own coach, I think she was fairly early on in her coaching journey. And at that point, she was only doing one-on-one coaching, which, in hindsight, I think is really powerful, because if you start with just one-on-one coaching, then through those client engagements, you get a really good idea of like what the actual pain points are. Like, so for example, like for me, I'm actually be the first client on Coach Stack. So I'm launching my own coaching business called Solo Founder Coach. As obviously you just alluded to, I'm a solo founder. I've been doing it for a couple of years and have good amount of expertise or experience there. And I have some ideas around what the pain points are, because I'm living it every single day, but I don't want to make that assumption that everyone else has those same pain points. But if I, work with, let's say, 3 or 5 solo founders one-on-one, I think fairly quickly I'll be able to understand where the patterns are and where people are getting blocked. And then again, based on that, whether it's, like a resource or a small group coaching program or masterminds, like depending on what those problems are and who your ideal client is, you can start to productize other services. I think that's key, is just like getting really clear on, what who you want to target and what your brand looks like, and then start to work with those first few folks one-on-one. And then from those one-on-one engagements, start to pull out what those key themes and problems that you're seeing, and then build additional content or, products based on that.
What success look like for you in the first year at coaching?
What does success look like?
In the first year of coaching.
Yeah. So I think, again, step one is literally just before our call, I'm building solofoundercoach.com. So step one is me going through the entire process end to end of like, essentially I'm going through that process that I'll work through with my own first clients. So it's going to be exciting to see not only obviously the website, but like have the full coach stack integration. Cause I'll be like, for example, like a client sign in button, and then that's how you get into the client portal. And so I've done all these things in like test environments or in different pilots. But I think when I actually go through it, the whole process end to end in production, I'm sure I'll catch a few bugs, and that's why I'm doing it, because I'd rather me experience it firsthand. So I think success is like, getting that launch, and then starting in April, having like, 2 to 3 clients onboarded per month. And, like I said, there's already stuff in the backlog of the product roadmap that I know I need to build. So like the remaining things are, like I mentioned, forms, just having some basic like email marketing functionality is key. And then also finally like automations. So like if you could think about a coach who like has a certain process for new client onboarding of like, here's a welcome email, and then here's a form for your new client questionnaire, and then here's a couple resources to get you started. And then on the tail end, like for offboarding, they might say like, hey, like thanks again for participating in my coaching program. Could you, take this survey to give feedback to me? Could you refer me to someone in your network? Could you provide a testimonial for me that I could place on my website? Like trying to automate all those flows and stuff. So I think, the classic line, right, is like, you don't know what you don't know. So those are the those are the known knowns. But I'm sure like once I get into it and start working with clients and they're walking me through their current process, there's inevitably going to be a couple of things that I didn't know about. And that's another reason why I'm trying to like kind of have it be a phased rollout, so that I like really fully understand all those different use cases and all those different processes before I just say like, hey, like here's a self-serve SaaS plan, and just go to the website, put in your credit card and get started. Like I think I'm close to that, but I'll feel a lot more confident once I onboard like 5 or 10 coaches.
I guess that brings me to my final question, Peter. Something that we need to talk about, but we haven't talked about yet.
What's one thing we didn't talk about?
But we need to talk about.
I mean, I think my biggest piece of advice maybe is just to just get started. Whether you're an entrepreneur or someone who's like looking into coaching, I think a lot of times it's kind of like analysis by paralysis, where you're, again, even like with tools like Claude or ChatGPT, like sure, it's awesome to have this co-founder almost, right? And you can kind of bounce ideas off it, but I think a lot of times, whether you're a coach or just an entrepreneur, maybe it's imposter syndrome, maybe it'd be something else, but there's that kind of psychological barrier to like kind of just getting started. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is like once, sure, it was scary to take that leap. And maybe that's why looking back on it, I took even a phased approach to launching Coach Stack, where it's like, hey, like I had this idea, but like before I actually do it, I'm going to, run through all this market research and then do customer development. So I think, and even doing that is a step, right? But I think just getting started is key. And then on this other note, which is related because I'm working on the solo founder coach website right now, it's kind of like, it's interesting because tools like Claude Code, right, can make it really easy for someone just to say, like, hey, I'm going to like block out a weekend and I'm going to build a product. But just like I mentioned earlier, I think AI can help with the last mile piece of it. But I still think, doing customer development and doing like market research is even more important now than it was before, because if it's so easy for someone just to vibe code something, I think it's really important that you're doing that work upfront to validate that there's an actual problem. There's demand before you start building. I mean, obviously you're going to learn regardless by vibe coding, but I just think like before investing a significant amount of time and energy, like the pre-work is even more important.
Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights. It's been incredibly enlightening to learn from you. The way you're thinking about solving a real problem you experience firsthand, doing the customer discovery upfront, and building Code Stack as a full founder is truly inspiring. I can't wait to see how you launch, get all your clients, and love to catch up sometime after the
Yeah. And thanks again for having me. It was a great conversation.